It looks like we are on.
Great, thank you. Looks like though we should still wait before we begin for a few other people to join us. I know last time there were some folks who were running on legislative time.
Now we're on vacation time, kind of.
Yeah, that's the other issue with this week is that a lot of the committees aren't meeting. And people are doing other things,
But Nathan and I handled our reminders in the House chambers and in the Democratic Caucus. So hopefully there'll be a few folks who can join us. While we're waiting for people from the in our core group, should we at some point just talk about some other dates going forward to get those on the calendar? I took the liberty of looking in April. It's April 12th and 24th, May 10th and 24th, and June 14th as possibles. I think those are the second and fourth Wednesday.
April 26th, actually.
Oh, 26th, you are right, yes. Can't read my own writing. And also maybe a discussion which may come up tonight as we're working through our agenda about how we best can meet legislators' thoughts about either advocating for constituents, getting constituent answers to questions, their personal understanding of broadband, which last session may not have brought everybody up to speed with Broadband 101, about how we maybe can work those sorts of questions in where there are new members of the legislature. They're coming in with different questions that about advocacy for constituents that they may need some help from you guys too. As I know that's something I'm still dealing with.
I will, on that note, Representative Dodge, Joe and I will do another session of Broadband 101 next Wednesday, although this one is in partnership with Maine Municipal Association. So it is considered a continuing education credit for municipal leaders, and thus there is a fee associated with it to get those credits. So it may not be relevant to the general public, and we're letting MMA promote it through their membership. But we're more than happy to keep doing those on a regular basis. You know, I think, Joe, you had pretty good attendance in the last one, yeah?
Yeah, I don't remember off the top of my head what the attendance was, probably somewhere within like the 25 to 35 people range. But I'll also note that that recording of that session lives on our YouTube page and on the website. So if you're interested in hearing what we went through in that presentation, I would recommend that you head that way, or send a recording to people who you know, might have questions or might be looking for that type of education.
And that maybe is something that we should include in our blurb that we send out, to make people more comfortable each time, to know that they can get a little bit of background before they join us, if that would make them feel better. Well, I'm not seeing others joining, and we're 5 minutes in. Do you have a suggestion or a thought?
Who's on the 207 952 2050?
This is Marianne Moore, and I headed home to beat the storm, so I'm taking it by phone.
Awesome. Hi, Marianne. Drive safe.
Thanks for
Thank
joining.
you, I will.
Thanks for joining, Marianne.
Yes.
Sure, absolutely.
I'd be in favor, Jan, of getting going. And
Yeah, there were some others that said they were going to come, but we can't wait forever for them.
Right, exactly. Well, awesome. Then if we can get started, first, I just would ask if everyone could please introduce themselves and maybe just say, if you are a legislator, your district where you represent and what brought you to this broadband caucus. And I would be glad to start. My name is Representative Jan Dodge. I represent House District 39, which includes Belfast, Northport, and Belmont. And I'm here because I have so many varying broadband situations. I felt I needed to be here to try to be able to help where I could. And I'm going to toss it to Senator Bennett, please.
Thank you, Representative Dodge. I'm Rick Bennett. I have the honor of serving 14 towns in Western Maine in the state Senate, and they go from the greater Freiburg area over by the New Hampshire line, all the way through the Lakes region, parts of Cumberland County and the Oxford Hills of Oxford County, and into the suburbs of Lewiston, Auburn, Mechanic and Falls and Minot. My interests, I'm really pleased to co-chair the Broadband Coalition as I did in the last legislature. And the bald fact is that unless we really modernize our infrastructure in broadband, rural Maine towns are going to die. And those are the people that I represent. And, you know, whether it's education and remote learning or telehealth or just economic survival, we need broadband. So that's what motivates me. I'll kick it over to Senator Grochowski.
Thank you so much. Nicole Rachowski, I represent Senate District 7, which is most of Hancock County. And I think we have some similar challenges to both Rep. Dodge and Senator Bennett's district. But we can add on to that a lot of unbridged islands who I think have been in some ways really pioneering solutions out of necessity. So there's a lot to work on there, but also a lot to learn from. And I serve on the Energy Utilities and Technology Committee and have for a couple of years. So I've been interested in this policy area in depth for a while. I'm glad to be here. Senator Moore, I don't know if it's easy for you to unmute again to say a longer hi if you like, but you're next, I think.
All right, thank you. Yes, this is Marianne Moore, and I'm the state senator for District 6, which is all of Washington County, and then 16 communities in eastern Hancock County, and I got right up to the rest of Hancock County, right, Nicole?
Yes.
And the reason I'm on here is that I have a lot of towns that are at various stages of planning and implementing and dealing with all the headaches. And I've got one town that, you know, Consolidated Communications has got the federal grant, and they're not able to apply for some other grants, and so there's a lot of frustration going on. So I'm trying to stay on top of what's available so that I can help the towns as I'm working through various issues with the town. Thank you. And I am driving, so I will be careful.
And where Senator Moore perhaps isn't able to kick it to the next person, I will ask Representative Arford, who is joining us, if she would be willing to introduce herself and tell us your district and why you are joining and are interested in the Broadband Caucus, please. Hi, Poppy.
Hi, thank you so much. So I am Representative Poppy Arford. I hail from Brunswick. The western part of Brunswick is District 101, which I have the privilege of representing. And I am interested in all aspects of the Broadband Caucus. And specifically, I know you touched on this last time, but I had a couple of constituents who have talked to me about these donuts. You mentioned them last time. I'd like to know more about, I don't know if we'll be able to touch on it this evening, but I'd love to know more about that and what people can do, if there's anything they can do if they live in a donut or in that type of an area where they're having that type of reception or no reception.
Thank you, Representative Arford. Shall we kick it over to Brian, perhaps, or Joe or Miles to introduce you folks, please?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm Brian Allenby. I'm the Communication Director for the Maine Connectivity Authority. Our president, Andrew Butcher, sends his regards. He was really hoping to be on, but is en route with his family as it is school break this week. I hope to be able to answer as many of your questions as I can, and where I can't, I'll hand it off to Tanya, my colleague who's on here and who's I'll let her introduce herself in a minute. Or certainly we can take it back to folks and bring back answers after this meeting. But look forward to hearing what we can all help with.
Thank you.
Tanya?
Good evening, folks. Good to join you again. I'm Tanya Emery with the Maine Connectivity Authority, Economic Development Director. And as it is school break week, as Brian just mentioned, I'm coming to you live from the parking lot of a local painting studio where my daughter's taking a painting class. So pleased to be with you from my minivan. Look forward to the conversation.
Maybe we should go to Ms. Osher. I'm sorry. I don't
Yeah,
know.
Representative Osher has joined us, Jan. I don't know if you could see that.
Yes, yes. Lori, do you want to introduce yourself? Give us your district and why you are interested in broadband, please.
My district is 25. I represent Orono, the majority of Orono, and that's where the University of Maine is located. And why? Because broadband is essential. And in my town, there's an Orono Old Town joined together to do to wire up our towns. And also I work, my day job is with Eastern Maine Development Corporation, which does broadband. That's not part of my job there, but I'm certainly interested on all levels. I want the legislature to do the right thing. So try to learn what that is.
We're all doing that, right? So I'm Miles Smith. I'm the executive director of the Maine Broadband Coalition. We provide staffing support for this caucus. We are a nonprofit organization that advocates and educates the public in order to achieve universal access to high-speed, high-quality broadband, together with equity and competition and all that other good stuff. So if you want to hear more about us, you can search our website, mainebroadbandcoalition.org, but we're going to be quiet and let the co-chairs run this thing. Thank you. Joe?
Yeah, I mean, I would have been fine with, in the spirit of being quiet, just letting this thing ride out. But yeah, I'm Joe Alva, average associate, helping obviously support this group and do other things outreach related for the Maine Broadband Coalition.
Awesome. Thank you all for your work and for your introductions. And our agenda asks that we now turn this back over to Brian for some follow-up questions and answers, some of which were based on questions that were developed and presented in our last session. So Brian, take it away if you would, please. Thank you.
Sure. And once again, thanks for having us. Miles, thank you for compiling the list of questions. I did want, certainly if there are other questions, we're happy to talk through those. As I looked through them, I think it probably breaks them into 4 main areas. The first one being infrastructure, those types of build outs. Second set of questions was more around workforce. Then supply chain was another one after that. And then really thinking about kind of our broadband action plan, BAP is the acronym that we're using for that, covered populations and digital equity work. If there are any others that come up as we're walking through these, certainly happy to address them. And if folks want to drop them in the chat or just yell them out loud, I think we're a small enough group. The first question was, what is happening to continue to fill in the gaps in the survey of service statewide? And I took this to mean it's kind of a going in the direction of a kind of a mapping exercise, which is definitely one of the areas that we are focusing on is gaining a continually improving picture of what broadband in Maine looks like, understanding kind of where there is service, where there is not service. The FCC, I guess, how in depth, Miles and Joe or Representative Dodge, I'll take some guidance here. How in depth or how helpful would it be to kind of like take a step to talk through the FCC mapping? Is that helpful, or is that going way down that rabbit hole too much?
I think maybe just 3 or 4 steps into the rabbit hole would be good. There's been a bit of publicity about the fact that the survey was closed, yet we still need more information. Maybe 2 or 3 steps, I think, please.
I'll just stick my head in it a little bit, and then we can pull each other back out. So earlier last year, the FCC for the very first time launched a broadband map that instead of being based at a census block level is actually attempting to identify every broadband serviceable location across the country. And so a broadband serviceable location is either a business or a home, or a single building that's a multi-dwelling unit, an MDU. So if you have an apartment building, that counts as one broadband serviceable location, which obviously has implications and issues, especially in more urban areas. The map is not perfect. And I think, as could be expected, if you're trying to draw, I mean, Maine alone has 640 some thousand broadband serviceable locations. And if you draw that across the whole country, it's quite an exercise. There was a challenge period. And I do want to clarify the challenge that there's availability for individuals to challenge the map. You can go right on our website, right on the homepage is a campaign called Correct the Dots. And there's two kinds of challenges. One, if you don't see your location on the map, you search your address and you don't see it, you can correct that, because we want to know if there is a point there that should be included on that map. The other kind of challenge is an availability challenge. And that is when, if you look at your location, there's a listing of service providers right there, as well as the speeds, the advertised speeds that they provide. If that service that's being listed there is not correct, we also want to know, right? If they're listing that you have access to gig symmetrical speeds with fiber, and you know for a fact that you certainly do not have access to those speeds, we want to know, because we need to understand where we should be putting our priorities and focusing our efforts as we're making investments around the state. So that map, it's a continual process with the FCC to update that map. So just because that January 13th deadline has passed, I would encourage you all, encourage your constituents, encourage everybody to still file those challenges, because while they won't necessarily have any impact on our BEAD allocation, it's going to continue to help us get a clearer picture of where the need is across the state. And this is every 6 months, the FCC is going to update the map. Internet service providers will continue to provide information about the availability that they provide. And then there is a challenge process, and we're going to continue to go through that challenge process and provide data as well. So it is not ending, for sure. Senator Grochowski?
Thank you. I wasn't sure that it was going to continue, so that's really welcome news. Question I have is, the Maine Broadband Coalition in particular was doing mapping exercises for quite a while in advance of this, and I assume that that's maybe what fed into the bulk challenges. Maybe not, but so maybe that's one question. The second part of that is, are the results of all the bulk challenges now visible on that map, so that our constituents are looking at the latest and greatest that you sent the feds?
Great question. So I think a lot of the two parts. One, the mapping that MBT's been doing for a while now, especially on the speed testing. While we can't submit speed tests because there's a lot of technical factors that go into speed testing, we can't submit speed tests as the data at the basis of a challenge. We are using that speed testing data, which we encourage everybody to continue to take, right? To help us with the analysis where we can do bulk challenges, right? Where we see areas where the speed testing is showing us that service doesn't exist, or a certain kind of, so if on the availability, it shows that there's a pocket of fiber, and we look on the speed testing and we say, look, all of the speed tests in this circle, there's nowhere close to fiber-like speeds. That's an area we're going to look more deeply into when we go to do our bulk challenges. So it's kind of the evidence that's working behind the scenes that'll help us as we try to identify those areas. Because with the bulk challenges, we're looking kind of statewide systematically to try to identify like the larger pockets of inconsistencies, as opposed to looking at every single 642,000 points. So certainly the speed testing is absolutely important. I am happy to report we are batting 1,000. I think we've had like 100 and so of the challenges. We submitted about 120,000 challenges. We are batting 1,000. We've had like 100 that have been upheld. So we're batting 1,000. We have 99.8% of the challenges left to be processed. The FCC is processing these. There's quite a when the challenge comes from either the bulk challenge from MCA or it comes from an individual. There's this whole, I wish I could draw it out for you. Basically, it goes back to the provider, and then the provider has up to 60 days, I believe, to either accept that or refute that. If they refute it, then they have a period to provide, the counterbalancing evidence, and then it goes back. It's why to get a map in June, they had to wrap up that challenge process in January. And so it's just really protracted. So, and that's why they're doing it every 6 months, is that cycle, it seems like it could be quick, but it's pretty drawn out. There's a number of 60-day periods that stack on top of each other. So we are continuing to push the FCC. We're monitoring how many of the challenges are accepted. The one thing we're really interested in seeing, and we're going to continue to ask for, is the status of individual challenges. We don't have access to the data of your constituents who might have challenged and said, availability or location. We just like to have a sense of that to understand where it's going on in the state, and we want to ensure that, if they're going through that process where there's the ISP responds and then they respond, that everybody's as supported as they can be as they go through that process as well. We don't have visibility into that right as of yet.
Just wanted to, thanks, Brian, that's all excellent. And just wanted to add one little note of context. I think one challenge that MCA faces, which is not their own fault at all, that's our federal regulatory environment, is that a lot of this data that ISPs have about the locations that they serve is not publicly shared data. So it's hard for people to challenge it. And it's hard for MCA to work with it because there may be things that they can't share with the public. That just, most companies aren't sharing with us or with anybody else where they're operating now, where they're providing service, what service is available, what speeds they're offering. And it gets a little bit, it just gets difficult to work with. And I don't envy MCA having to navigate those waters, but a lot of those problems are federal, unfortunately, and hard to solve here.
Yeah, I do want to add, something. So the FCC maps are all kind of looking in arrears, right? They're looking at service that was available as of June 2022 or as of December 2022. One of the other initiatives that we're undertaking with providers is forward-looking data, getting a better understanding of what deployment plans look like for the next 12 months. Understanding this data is even more confidential and probably even more sensitive as it includes those build plans. So we are trying to work with providers to gain an understanding, because as we make investments, it certainly behooves us to know where there are planned deployments across the state. Balancing that with there's nothing really to hold providers to finishing out that deployment. And so we need to balance our ability to make decisions about our investments with, there might be a high likelihood that it's going to happen, but also don't want to leave communities in the dark if that doesn't come through on the provider's end. Senator Bennett?
Yes, I just wanted to ask a question about it. When we wrote the authorizing statute for MCA, we gave MCA as much as many levers as possible to get information, and ultimately, I know some of these broadband providers, the ISPs, they're not interested in having public money, but I mean, you have a fairly large club that you can use for participation and information sharing. You are going to keep it confidential, so I would think that you should be able to get access from the providers, and you certainly have the right, I think, under the statute to condition any support on their providing information, following through on what they're going to, you know, what they say they're going to do and that sort of thing. So just wondering about that and whether I understand why those tools may not want to be employed, but I mean, at the outset, but I mean, we're all in a hurry to get this done. We know information is critical. The people sitting on the proprietary information was one of the reasons that we made MCA the form it is, you know, not subject to the usual rules of government where you're quasi-governmental, and gave you all the ability to flexibly deploy the cash. So just wanted your take on that and how that's working out, and whether that can come to bear here in getting the information.
I think it's working out well, and so I'll say a personal thank you. A lot of that structure is helpful on a daily basis. You know, we are in the process. We have a program called Reach Me, which is a line extension program. It's the first time this has ever been done in Maine, where MCA is working directly with providers to identify those locations where it's never made financial sense for them as a private company to invest, right? They'd never get a return on these 5 homes at the end of a road. We have a line extension program to provide incentive for them to do just that, to say, hey, you know, MCA is going to make this worth your while. We're in the process of reviewing 12 proposals from 10 providers across the state. It's been a really exciting process, specifically from the Reach Me program point of view. What it's also allowed us to do is to sit down with 10 providers across the state and have conversations face to face, which I feel like is increasing rarity in this world. And in all of those conversations, we have talked about, you know, sharing this forward-looking data to get a better sense of where that deployment is going to happen. And we really haven't had any pushback on that. I think our biggest, what we want to do is make sure we collect it in a way that's of most utility to us, in providing that process and system to take that data in, to develop a schedule that we can work with them on to do it on a regular basis. We were talking just today, and you know, they're submitting their FCC availability data twice a year. We said, well, what if we slotted the other 2 quarters, and the other two quarters a year, you're providing MCA with the next 12 months worth of build plans that you have coming. So, and I think trying to understand how we can, where those relationships and where there is, for lack of a better term, you know, some contractual or agreement, the teeth, right, that go with it, to say, if you're going to say you're going to build in this area, how do we all make sure that that happens, so that there aren't communities who are in a planned build, we don't fund, and then the build doesn't happen. We just want to make sure that nobody's left in the lurch.
No question, it's a delicate balance there, right? Because I mean, also you have the flexibility, in fact, to actually build dark fiber yourself. If push comes to shove, it's not your first go-to, I know, but and from that vantage point, you know, you could be something of a competitor to these providers, but that's not in keeping with your mission. So,
well, and whether it's a competitive or you know, open access dark fiber network, I didn't see any questions specific to middle mile, and I can give a quick middle mile update. We are still waiting a word from NTIA on it's a $50 million middle mile proposal that we put in. It would be a $35 million grant, competitive grant program from NTIA, National Telecommunications and Information Administration, that would help do just that, Senator Bennett, and would, you know, it would augment the 3-ring binder that exists in the state. It's called MooseNet, the name of the proposal, and it would honestly be a game changer in terms of what we could.
You're applying for separate funding for that? Is that what you said?
That's correct. So it was a competitive NTIA program. It wasn't, and so we applied for 35 million. 50 million. I can drop a link right in the chat here that outlines a little bit.
When do you expect to hear?
March, very soon.
Okay.
Yeah, so, in a few more of these meetings, we might be able to come back. There's also a complementary, there is capital projects fund, ARPA capital projects funds remaining that would complement using middle mile to get to that last mile, those last mile connections. And so as soon as we hear on the MooseNet proposal, we'll also have some ARPA money to really think about strategically how we're going to use that. So realizing that I've only made it through the first question, I'm going to try to keep going.
Well, I think it's a good transition to the donut hole question, which was put there, and Representative Arford brought it up as well. So that'd be a good one for us to discuss.
Yeah. And I think I will probably want to start by saying we have two goals, two of our goals for a lot of our last mile infrastructure programs. One is providing universal connectivity for communities, for regions. So eliminating those donut holes, right? Eliminating those little pockets where you might have service in the middle of a town, but you have small pockets in the outer reaches or at the ends of the roads. We're also trying to, at the same time, find those areas of greatest need and make sure that they're funded. Looking at the governor's goal to provide everybody with a connection by the end of 2024. As we look forward to our BEAD funding, which is the second big round of federal money that's going to come in, the BEAD money requires, when we build our BAP, our Broadband Action Plan for this BEAD funding, the BEAD program requires that we hit those locations that have service of less than 25/3 first, before we do anything else. Then we can move on to those areas that are, between 25/3 and 100/20. So, as we think specifically about the second cohort of Connect Ready, which is our public-private infrastructure grant program, we're really trying to accomplish both of those goals of providing that universal connectivity, of finding projects at that regional scale, right? So where multiple towns can come together, where there's a broadband utility district, while also hitting those little pockets where the people have no or like next to no service, that's under 25/3, which aren't always contiguous with each other, right? And so it becomes this balance of how do you hit all the little pockets, understanding that that's not how broadband networks are built, while also, gaining the efficiencies of building at scale and at a regional scale where you can start to think about projects in a larger sense. And so we're about to undergo, for starting a great conversation today, and to refine our Connect Ready process. I hope some of you all join us for the board meeting on Friday. We'll be talking at the board meeting, and maybe I hope I'm not spoiling the news too much, but it sounds like that Connect Ready Cohort 2 will be launching in August. And so we're going to take this spring and early summer to really refine that and try to answer those questions. How do we build at a regional scale? How do we allow communities to come together? How do we support broadband utility districts? While also making sure that we're kind of finishing off and providing universal connectivity, so there aren't these little pockets of folks left with no service. That all sounds easy, right? And so building Connect Ready Cohort 2, while also keeping in mind that the BEAD funding will be coming, very late of this year or early 2024. And so trying to, and that will require us to address those least served, those under 25/3 locations first.
If I might, Brian, thanks. You guys have a very tough job to do to make everybody happy at once, and I don't envy you. It's hard, and we know you're doing your best. To Representative Arford's question specifically about Brunswick. So I think this is an opportunity to talk about what the private sector does that maybe doesn't really have anything to do with MCA or the state policy, state agencies, right? So broadband service, it's somewhat free market, basically, unregulated, in that if a provider can build a service that reaches your home, then you're free to buy it from them. And so what happens then is that private capital looks for places where it makes financial sense for them to build out those networks. You tend to find that they don't like to compete with each other. They like to, it's not a coincidence that you only have one cable provider that you can choose from. And that's something that we've seen in past decades. And now we have this new technology, fiber optic, which a lot of investment is going into the state to get fiber optic to people's homes. There's a ton of private investment going on all over the state. It's mostly going, when it's fully private equity, it's going to our urban areas. It's not happening in at the same speed in different places. Even the city of Portland, West End, some of our richest residents in our most dense city still doesn't have fiber optic to the home. But as I understand it, there's plans in the works for those networks to reach everybody in the city with private service, although they may only have one choice. Specific to Brunswick, I'm not sure if you're thinking about a specific provider. I know, for example, there's one provider that built out the downtown area of Brunswick, and there are places that they don't service where, for example, there's underground cables that connect the homes on a subdivision to electricity and cable, and it wasn't worth it financially for them to provide internet to those homes. And so, they don't get connected unless the homeowners association is going to pony up the money to connect them. So maybe that's a donut hole, maybe it's not. Then you have a bunch of rural areas, comparatively rural areas at the edge of town, where the provider just didn't find it financially viable for them to build out that service. And what the provider thinks is viable or not depends a lot on their conditions. So if they are already on those telephone poles and already have infrastructure in place to serve that location, maybe they'll go a lot further to the edge of town and service more locations. But where they're new, they might focus more on the highest value for mile built in the most urban areas. You have your hand up, so maybe that's a good start.
So the scoop is this: one of the areas is in the old Navy housing, which now it's all been resold for commercial homeowners. I mean, for just residential purposes of just anybody in town. And what they're noticing is in part of this neighborhood is where the donut hole is. It's I don't know, it's probably one block. And outside the block, everything seems to be working well. But in this, so I'm just wondering if what you're talking, if it has something to do with the way that area was built at some point. I mean, it's relatively old. Then the housing it's been there for, oh God, at least probably close to, I don't know, 35 years at least. Do you have any ideas of what it's right sort of in town? It's not. Well, it's
Brunswick Landing, the east side of town, where the air station housing has been.
No, it's not actually that way. It's actually
different.
It's on the other. There's two different areas. This is a huge area of housing, but it's not close to the base, the old base. It's closer to the western part. It's the western part of Brunswick. That's how come it's my district. But it's a significant number of homes, all closely, relatively close together. So can you think, I mean, do you think that it had something to do with the way that the area, the infrastructure was?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to that specific situation, or probably most specific situations. Maybe we can follow up separately, and I can look into that a little bit, see if I could get some answers for you, and maybe MCA does too.
Yeah.
But it really, these things happen all over the place when a private company is just trying to make money. Not that there's anything wrong with that, to paraphrase Seinfeld, but it's how the economics work, right? So there may be something there about the density of the location or where the poles were located, or they didn't have access to those poles. They weren't already on those poles, or maybe there's a different provider that they didn't want to compete with. It could be any of a number of things, or it could have been that, they just didn't put it in their build plan. But I don't know, Brian, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think those are all really viable reasons that could be the case. And Representative Ufford, I was talking with a provider, and they said, they were doing a bunch of work pre-pandemic, pandemic hit, their costs went through the roof. And so they said, we stopped laying fiber, right? Like our supply chain costs went through the roof, and we just couldn't keep going because the economics of it just didn't make sense anymore. And so we paused on that. And now they're starting to look at it and come back to it. The one other reason that I've learned about is especially on the legacy on the telcos, like the old, folks who are building out an existing, old telephone network, the incumbent providers, they build based on exchanges, right? And so like when we think about it, it feels kind of antiquated that you'd be building out your network based on a phone exchange, but that's still how they're built. And so, we had another community, it was up near Skowhegan, who I was talking to, Chesterville, I think. And they said, why is half of the town getting built and the other town, the other side isn't? And they said, this half of the town is in the Skowhegan exchange, and that half of the town's in the Livermore exchange. And so that is how technically they're building it, which seems like, I know it's not an answer that is easier for a constituent to hear, but there are those kinds of technical reasons behind it. So happy to continue that conversation about that in particular. We can dig into who the provider is and are happy to try to facilitate those conversations as much as we can. If there are particular areas, that is what our line extension program is for. If it's an area where it just hasn't made financial sense for the provider to finish up this little neighborhood or the end of the road or this cluster of locations, that's what we want to work with the providers to do, to help it make financial sense for them through the MCA grants.
How would the consumer, could they just speak with their provider of services for their internet about this? Or is there any way they could find out?
Yeah, so on the homepage of our website, if you scroll down a bit, there's a internet service availability in Maine map. And so folks can actually go in, it's the third tab over, it says internet service providers. They can enter their address and they can see exactly what the providers are in that area and the service that is listed. And so they can verify, what they are supposed to have. And so I think that is probably a first step to say, is what they're supposed to have what they actually have, is to confirm that truth. And if it is, and it's still, subpar service or service that doesn't meet, what their neighbors down the street have, then it's a conversation with the ISP. And we're certainly happy to help convene that on the back end. Miles and the folks at NBC can as well, or maybe it's a combination of them, but we're happy to have those conversations because we want to understand where those holes and gaps are as well.
Thank you.
For sure. Okay, to move on to workforce, Miles? Or Representative Dodge, sorry. You're muted.
I'll just keep giggling. Yes, absolutely to move on to workforce, but I did want to try to leave at least a few minutes, and maybe now is the time to ask the question, are there broadband bills that anybody here wanted to talk about after you perhaps answer the workforce question?
Yes, and Representative Dodge, I also noticed that Senator Tipping and Representative Warren have joined us too.
Yes, and so would you guys like to introduce yourselves? Tell us what district you are from, please, and why you have joined us tonight. Senator Tipping, may we start with you?
Sure. Mike Tipping, Senate District 8, and I joined because Nicole told me to.
That's an excellent reason. And Representative Warren, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, I'm going to be a second for the Senator Nicole Grahowski told me to sub caucus here, but she reminded me, and I'm so grateful that she did. I'm very fortunate to be a new member of the Energy Committee, and I've got so much to learn, and I know that it's a very, very important issue across the state. So there's a lot of equity implications, I know. And thank you so much, Shan, for organizing.
And what district do you represent, please, Sophie?
Oh my gosh, yes. I represent a small coastal portion of Scarborough, District 124.
Thank you very much. So could I just see a show of hands? Do any of you have legislation that you would want to just speak a moment or two about at the end of this session?
I have one bill that I could discuss briefly, but I like this flow here with the getting these questions answered. So we can skip that if we run out of time.
Okay, awesome. Then take it away again, Brian, please, if you would continue. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I am free if we go over a little bit. I have more time if folks have more questions. Happy to, but would rather answer them. Don't want to leave you hanging. So in terms of workforce, I'm going to drop a link right in the chat here. And I might actually hand this over. I see Tanya is back in her home office. And so I might actually, oh, she's saying, give me 1 second. Tanya's our economic development director and works with Kwame Yaboa, who is our workforce development manager. And we recently released the executive summary of a really great broadband workforce report that takes a look at broadband workforce in the state of Maine, the gaps where we need to put more energy, and kind of some of the potential solutions, as well as quantifying what that means. So when we talk about shortages, it's in the range of, it's over 3,000 people who we need to add to the broadband workforce, especially to take into account the massive amount of, I think, what did we estimate it on, between 350 and $500 million when we talk about both the public funds and the private funds that are being leveraged.
Yeah.
Tanya, can I hand this to you?
You can. Thank you. And thank you all for your patience, as I've now left my minivan and I am home and painting class is over. So I'm happy to be able to more fully have this discussion with you. You may have seen some media coverage. We had an event a couple of weeks ago where we talked about our workforce report, and we had a great team from Des Moines work with us to really understand if we are going to truly tackle this problem with the scale of resources that we finally have available by combining both the federal and state funding that the governor's made available to MCA, we have to have the workforce that can help us deploy that. And the telecommunications workforce has shrunk so dramatically in the last several decades that we really need to understand what the critical positions are, understand what the positions are that it takes to deploy this infrastructure, but also to service it on an ongoing basis, to operate it, to design it, and also to provide, standard business functions like customer support and project management and all the financial things that come with expanding, both small and large businesses in the telecommunications space. So that executive summary is online, and the report as a whole really told us what we knew, which was, like most industries in the state of Maine, there's an acute workforce shortage already. That shortage is only going to get worse because of the demographic challenges that the state is experiencing, and that will then be exacerbated by the growth and investment in the industry, which mean that this, the telecommunications space in particular, is just like many of the other trades, many of the other occupations in the state, a really important career field to expose people to, expose kids, dislocated workers, people who are looking for a new career change and opportunity, and also to formalize and standardize training. There are several curricula that already exist. Some industry associations nationally have fiber optic technician curriculum that can be stood up pretty quickly. And when Brian spoke earlier about BEAD funding, as he said, we have to first serve the unserved people, those at less than 25/3, before we can move on to anything else. The one other thing we can do simultaneously is fund workforce initiatives, because it is critical to successful deployment and to successfully serving the unserved and then the underserved populations. So we are already serving workforce purposes with our planning funds, working with Washington County Community College on a cohort of a fiber optic training program, which I believe has 10 people enrolled, started in January. This is the first time they've ever stood it up. I think, Brian, I think I put a link to that in our document. If you could grab that and drop that in the chat, that would be amazing. I mean, this is a great opportunity, and it's a career field that is going to grow and have tremendous upward mobility and does not require, you know, an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree or any formal higher education. Apprenticeship and on-the-job training really can satisfy the needs for a lot of positions. So yes, we see this as a significant challenge in terms of the shortage being somewhere between 3,200 and 3,900 jobs, but we also see this being a tremendous opportunity. And we need to work together across the industry and with our partners in education, workforce, labor. We want to work with our existing trade unions to make sure that we get this opportunity in front of as many people as possible. Happy to answer any questions about the workforce piece of it. That executive summary is amazing. Please feel free to read that, share that with your networks as well. If folks have questions, happy to answer those too.
Just a quick one, Tanya, which can be offline. As a member of the Education and Cultural Affairs Committee, I'm particularly concerned about the time that's going to elapse between, yes, we have this need, and now we need to stand up a program, and we need to recruit folks to be part of the program. And are we also short of instructors who will then teach the program? And which comes first, the chicken or the egg? And are we working on all of that together? Please feel free to reach out to me if there's something that the Education Committee needs to know about and to do, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that offer, and I'm sure we will. Thank you.
Tanya, do we have a rough timeline for when the full report will be released? I know we did the executive summary, but there's still some reviews being done on the full report.
Yeah, we are collecting feedback. What we presented was the executive summary, and we shared the draft report. I will say this report was really based on obviously a lot of demographic analysis and sort of number crunching, but also a tremendous amount of industry participation. So we really, I had to say, Kwame just absolutely knocked it out of the park. He had been on the job for a few weeks and was in meetings with ISPs and their most senior leadership to talk to them and understand what their workforce challenges are, what their, you know, how could we get people into these roles, and to start to put that information together. So this really has been a piece of our work where we've had incredible industry partnership right from day one. So we felt it was important to present the draft report and then give the opportunity to those stakeholders who participated in working with us on developing it to give some feedback. That feedback should be wrapped up in the next couple of weeks. And I would say by probably St. Patrick's Day, you'll see a final report. Mid-March is our goal, to have the report stamped as final. And then the whole smorgasbord of it will be on our website for your leisure reading. Thank you, Brian. Appreciate that follow-up.
Any other questions on workforce before we jump down to supply chain? All right. I think supply chain are hearing mixed reactions, especially as we talk to providers about this. I think talking to folks a year and a half ago, it was of massive concern. I think folks have started to see some of those supply chain shortages and bottlenecks reduce, which it certainly is not going to be the end of it. I'm sure we'll continue to see blips in that supply chain. Different providers are also in different positions, right? So like larger providers have stockpiles of the supplies that they need for projects. Smaller providers don't. I think, one of the things we're trying to do is, one of the concerns we've heard is how do we, when we make an award, how do we, so when we approve, so when the board approves an award for say a community or a group of communities and a provider to work together, how do we get that money to them as quickly as possible? Because one of the biggest things that we're hearing is, you know, even in a 3-month or a 6-month period, prices are up 15%. So I think it's probably less about supply chain and maybe more about inflation and prices. And so one of our real goals is getting that money out the door and getting the folks working on that project the information they need to be securing the supplies as quickly as possible, so that there are no undue delays there that are going to, you know, result in them having higher prices than they originally anticipated and what we were able to fund. I don't have a terribly more in-depth answer there, you know, but it certainly is something we are monitoring in having those discussions with providers to ensure that, you know, on the back end, as part of the award process, you know, we are, when we put together the plan, when we put together an agreement, there are endpoints, right? And we understand things can always change, but we are taking all of that into account when we're looking at builds and getting the infrastructure on the ground and people lit up as quickly as possible. Certainly are taking that into account as well, and asking the providers to when they think about building out a network. And then Tanya, I might hand it back to you. I think the last few questions were about, I think, the BAP process. And I'll read it to you out loud just for the folks who are on here. And I'm not sure whose this was, but I'm interested in hearing about the training opportunities being planned for covered populations. Will these be a roadshow, since every county doesn't have a community college? Wondering if you wanted to share any thoughts there. And I looked at this more, I think I interpreted it from the planning point of view, but maybe it's a workforce question.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. Part of what we sought to understand during our workforce analysis in the report is how can we best address the shortages, and that's a variety of strategies. And as I noted earlier, this doesn't require, you know, most of these jobs do not require a 4-year degree or even a 2-year associate's degree. Many of them can be done in 6-week modules or with, you know, 3 or 4 weeks of classroom training and then some on-the-job or apprenticeship training. So we are really committed to exploring all possible alternatives. And that's why we started conversations with our technical high schools. And those are an incredible resource in regions. Obviously recognizing not everybody has access to those, but they are an important part of the infrastructure to create that training opportunity. And we've been working with 2 different organizations on the idea of a mobile training lab. You know, one thing I think we do need is we probably could just build a pole yard in every service center community in the state, because that seems to be a real need. KVCC has a pole yard for their electrical line worker program. And that's a tremendous opportunity. And there's a lot of people who are competing for wanting to have access to that space. So, I mean, our work, when I said earlier that we can also fund workforce portions in addition to serving unserved populations, you know, some of our work and part of what's going to be identified through the BAP process, which is the Broadband Action Plan, is maybe one of our strategies is that we fund pole yards, and that allows us to accelerate the training pipeline dramatically, because we're not competing for, you know, on the job training space. We then have the ability to accelerate those training programs that get people into the field. And we are working already with a number of both the contractors, the ISPs, and the contractors that do work on behalf of the ISPs. I will tell you, when Fidium came through our neighborhood in Bangor, there was not a single Maine truck that was involved in that build out. It was all out-of-state contractors. So those are paychecks that are the vast majority of them are going somewhere else. And that just made me more motivated to understand how we can employ a variety of strategies to get Mainers into those jobs.
Yeah. And Tina, I just one point about the report that keeps sticking with me is that these are not construction boom jobs that are going to be gone in 3 years. We saw in the analysis done in the report said that these are jobs that are going to stick around. These are jobs there's going to need to be ongoing maintenance and work done on these networks. They're jobs with transferable skills to other similar industries. And so, you know, when I think about it, it's not that there's going to be a $500 million infusion of cash into the broadband economy in Maine, and then 5 years from now, that's going to go away and folks are left without those jobs. We're setting people up for success in the future, which from a
Absolutely.
workforce point of view is really exciting.
Yes, very much so. We want to be able to move people, you know, particularly Maine has identified that we have a real challenge with disengaged workforce. For example, young men who are in the range of 18 to 30, not employed and not in school. Those are folks that I think it was Charlie Colgan, I remember saying, these are people that are basically just disengaged and don't have really an articulated reason for being disengaged. How do we find something that feels rewarding and challenging to them, but also gives them the opportunity to learn a living wage and earn credentials that allow them to continue to advance through their career? I mean, that's really a win-win for us, to serve an industry that needs it and also to help engage populations in a workforce that's meaningful and productive. Was there another BAP related question, Brian? I'm trying to remember. I think there were two in the last section, right?
Yeah, I think there's one more here, and we touched on this a little bit earlier, and I think it was, you know, what kind of engagement are we doing through adult ed programs or local libraries? Could AARP's network be helpful? And Tanya, I was wondering, maybe you could just speak quickly to when we think about BAP and this engagement process, and then kind of the ongoing, our ongoing work to address, you know, digital skills and maybe just mention some of the partners we're working with and kind of the kinds of venues.
Yeah, for sure. I was really glad to see this question because the list of organizations that were mentioned specifically are all partners that are part of our Digital Equity Task Force. So whoever wrote the question really knocked it out of the park without realizing it. And actually, it's a testament to Maggie's work. Maggie Drummond-Ball, our Strategic Partnerships Director, has been working on this Digital Equity Task Force since mid-2022. And it's really come together beautifully. And we have representatives from AARP, the State Library Network, the Adult Ed program from DOE, really sort of at the highest level so that they can understand what our process is and what our needs are, and then take that message back to their networks and say, okay, AARP, we have this incredible network of livable communities, and one of the domains of livability is connectedness. And how do we work together to make sure that this is part of what our communities are looking at when they're looking at livability? Stuff that's good for seniors is by and large good for all of us. And so we want to work with those partners that already have plans and priorities that are related. We definitely know that we cannot do this work by ourselves, and so we have to leverage those existing networks. And our plan is that wherever possible, whether it's digital equity programming, digital skills training, is that we will plug into existing networks rather than, for example, going out and renting a series of office spaces around the state to set up a digital literacy skills training classroom. We don't need to do that. We have career centers. We have adult ed programs. We have, you know, all kinds of great resources within our communities. And that's also a really important part of why our regional and tribal broadband partners are so important to us, because they are the boots on the ground that know who those partners are in each of your regions and your districts. So, you know, Lori, EMDC is one of our regional partners. They are critical to helping us understand who is on the ground that can help us understand the needs in the planning process, hold those community meetings, have those town hall discussions, engage those conversations, and then also who can help us develop the strategies and implement the strategies within some existing infrastructure. So we're spending the dollars really on the programming that matters and not the infrastructure that supports that programming.
Thank you so very much to all of you for these wonderful, comprehensive answers that have been just condensed into these great newsy bits. So because we are 4 minutes over time, I would just ask Senator Bennett if you could at least please give us 2 or 3 sentences and the LD number or LR number, please, of your broadband bill. And if there are any of the rest of you who have broadband bills, if you could just please let us know so that you could do the same in these final 3 or 4 minutes, please. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Representative Dodge. I'll just be very brief about it because the bill isn't out of the reviser's office yet. I can't remember the LR number, but it's about pole attachments. We know that pole attachment is a significant cost. One member of the PUC said that it's maybe as much as 40% of the cost of building broadband and pole attachment work and fees and make ready and all that. I put in a bill that builds on most recent data that's being assembled now, and the bill would stand up a separate entity that would be responsible for administering pole attachments on these assets, these poles that largely either owned by the electric utility, or they have rights of way by the electric utility, or by consolidated for the most part across the state. So more later on this, but and it is a work in progress. And by the way, if any of you are interested in this bill, please let me know, because I'd love your input as we fine tune the bill. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Bennett. I would mention Kira Reardon, who works for us and was previously at the OPA, has been really focusing on pole attachments at MCA. And so if that's a topic that this caucus wants to go, Miles, I don't know what your agenda looks like over the next few months, but if pole attachments is a topic to go in depth, just let us know and we could have Kira join for that. And I'm sure she could speak to some of the challenges we're seeing and how we're going to try to support communities and folks through this, because it's the last thing we want to be to stand in the way, right, of deploying that.
Brian, I'd really value an introduction between her and me, just to share with her where I am on that bill, if that's
yeah, absolutely.
And Senator Grohowski had also said that she has a bill or two, and but her bill has also not yet come out of the revisor's office. So she doesn't have an LD number, but she'll be speaking about that because she had to drop off this Zoom tonight. So again, thank you to all of you. And is there anything that you would like to say before we wrap up, Miles, please? Or Brian, or Tanya, or Joe?
I would just add that prior to your next meeting, you're likely to hear from the Maine Connectivity Authority about the launch of our survey, which is a really important part of our planning process. Our date is March 1st that will be put online. And I know that Joe and Miles will be helping us spread the word through their amazing networks, and we'll be putting out a lot of communication. That's just one piece. We also have a lot of other ways that we want to engage with people, analog and digital. And so if you have thoughts about how we can plug into existing events, for example, I had a meeting today and someone suggested that we make an appearance at the governor's office, the governor's conference on tourism, which is in Bangor in March, which is a great opportunity to talk to outdoor recreation and tourism businesses about their needs and how we can support that industry. So would love to hear your feedback or thoughts on any engagement opportunities that we might take advantage of, and anything that you guys can do to help us spread the word on the survey would be much appreciated.
Excellent. Just two quick things. Number one is about the Broadband and Brews tomorrow night in Liberty. I'm guessing that is maybe canceled.
Yeah, that has been rescheduled. I think it's March 16th, and we'll get that in our newsletter tomorrow.
Awesome. The second quick thing, bye Lori, thanks for joining. The second quick thing was about a blurb that can be included in all legislators' constant contact outreach materials about the survey Tanya mentioned, as well as getting on the website, taking the speed test. Perhaps we're ready for some little thing to help with that also from through legislators.
Sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for your time this evening. And our next meeting is March 8th, and we'll be doing some planning and whatever between now and then. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a great evening. Bye-bye.
Thanks all. Have a good evening.
Bye now.